Hi, my name's Dominique, and together with my team, we produce the content for our weekly Swisspreneur episodes. I hope you enjoyed today's show.
If you're not willing to take risks, calculated risks, I think then you shouldn't venture into entrepreneurship.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Doris, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me.
You are a successful founder, a board member, and also investor in startups. And today we're going to talk about your entrepreneurial story. Let's start with your personal background. You earned a degree in translations, and this is not the typical background to then later become an entrepreneur. So I'm curious to learn more about in what way that this educational background of studying translations has actually helped you to become an entrepreneur.
Well, since in the end I became an entrepreneur in my core competence field, translations, I think it's not so exotic, because at least it was my core business where I could start as an entrepreneur.
And you later also earned an executive MBA from the University of St. Gallen. In what way has that also complemented your skill set, and why did you decide to take an MBA to further educate yourself?
Yeah, I think that was a crucial point, because I think the executive MBA, that really gave me kind of a framework of how to approach strategic problem solving, on how to approach finances, marketing, IT, you name it. It goes across technology, right. It goes across the board. I think without this, it would probably have been hard to start as an entrepreneur and start as a CEO in the end.
Makes sense. So let's go back to the early days. You were the head of language services at the SBV, the former UBS sort of, before they merged together. Mm-hmm. And you sort of said in an interview that you turned the translation department into a profit center, something that is usually costing money for the companies, but you turn it into a profit center. How did you do that? Because that sounds like an entrepreneurial endeavor itself.
Well, actually, I joined Swiss Bank Corporation because they were planning to outsource their in-house translation services. Mm-hmm. And beforehand, I was starting up my own company as a language technology consultant. And I wanted to also to build up a translation section. And when I heard that the Swiss Bank Corporation is thinking about outsourcing their department, so I got in touch with the head of the corporate center and the CFO. And so we decided the bank was not ready yet for outsourcing in 95. But they asked me whether I wouldn't be willing to join the bank and prepare the team for the outsourcing. So that's why I suggested, why don't we start with a profit center, and then we can start offering our services on the market on the market and see how the services and the pricing and everything works.
So just to get that straight, you were doing the internal translations, but you also offered your translation services to other companies outside of the bank.
Yes.
That sounds very special, because that's like not what you would expect, right? So why was that a strategic decision? Why was that important?
I think it was important for our internal team and for myself as well to see whether the services can be offered in the market and whether there is a market for offering services like that. Of course, it's a huge translation market, sure, which is very, very atomized. And but this gave us the framework so that we could test our services on the market and see how clients react.
Got it. And then you actually made more money in the end than you cost the bank. So you really were a profit center. I think that's just a great story per se to have that setup. And then you basically focused on business process outsourcing. I think the BPO was sort of the keyword in these days. Yeah. Why was this an uprising trend, and sort of how were we able to capitalize on that?
Well, actually, no, we basically just copied the IT sector, because they were during that time, banks were starting to outsource their in-house IT departments to India, to wherever. And because it was non-core, and I thought, well, by the way, translation service is non-core either. Why don't we outsource this? And that's probably, Peter Wuffli, my former boss, he has thought about this already beforehand, that it's non-core, so we source it out. And I think it's a great business model, because on the one hand, I always say that the business process outsourcing for non-core services is kind of a triple win situation. On the one hand, the client that outsources its in-house department has variable cost instead of fixed cost, and they gain access to a much larger skill pool. The translator itself, or the non-core person itself, is transferred to a company where this service is core, and they have huge talent development opportunities. I mean, I had some of the younger talents, they became managing directors of the whole region of Asia, and they started off as junior translators. You would never be able to do that within a bank or within other company with the translation services. And the third winner was us as a service provider to make a business. And I was so surprised that in Europe and in the US, nobody actually, or hardly anybody copied us except for the company in Canada, which we acquired later on, and they were outsourced as well. They were the kid of an outsourcing initiative as well, and so that's how we grew. And they offered that service in Canada, but apart from that, I've never heard it.
Got it. So you're really specialized, and I think that also underlines your core competencies, as you said in the beginning. One thing that is also interesting for me is before you actually then created the spin-off, so to say, you were really an entrepreneur itself in a large corporate. How did that work? How were you able to make your own decisions and to sort of be an entrepreneur within the corporate structures?
I think the blunt answer to this is because it's kind of an exotic. It's a necessary evil to have translations within a bank or within another company, and people were happy. Managers were happy if you did your job properly, and they didn't really care about how you did it.
So as long as the job was done, they were happy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then in 1997, you actually took the step and founded the external company called CLS Communication AG. You were the founder and CEO of that company, and in the beginning, it was still sort of a collaboration with the Swiss Banking Corporation, right? So how did you take that step, from being an internal team to the external company that is suddenly its own business?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, what we did, of course, we did a service level agreement, a complete service level agreement with both, with Swiss Bank Corporation and Zurich Insurance, who jumped onto the bandwagon as well. And of course, there was no. We had to do a good job, otherwise we would have lost the contract. Right. So we better make sure that we did a good job. And of course, you have to create your own processes, you have to create your own systems and build that whole thing up and see how does it work together with the former employer. Also for our employees, they have been spending 10, 20 years with the bank, and then now they're outsourced in a freaky startup. So. It was a major change for the culture change as well. And then when we started to integrate other translation services from other institutions, of course we suddenly had a number of different of people that were coming from a different corporate culture, and that was one of the. And I only realized that in hindsight, one of the most thrilling things was to create our own corporate culture over time, and to make sure that this mix of different cultures really worked well. And in the end, when we had our 15th anniversary, I just came across the CD yesterday. When we had our 15th anniversary, one of my colleagues told me that CLS really has a strong corporate culture. And the thing was, have you ever been at the party where 150 out of 180 people that were present at the party were standing on the dancing floor before the first course was served? So that was really, I thought, okay, that's also work hard and party hard.
So we got to talk about that in a minute, because I think also there the core values play a crucial role that you defined early on. So we're going to talk about that in a second. What I'm also curious to learn more about is, sort of leaving the safe haven of being a part of a corporate culture or a corporate organization where you have, financial support, you sort of don't have the same pressure as you have with your own company. How did you deal with that? Because as you said, you have the service level agreement afterwards with the CLS Communication AG, but then you also have more pressure that you need to handle, because if you don't do a good job, the service level agreement is done, right?
Yes, exactly. And you had to make sure that it didn't run into a loss, the company. And of course, in the beginning, we had support we had HR support from UBS.
Okay.
And then later on, a couple of years later, we hired our own HR manager, and we decoupled. And for the accounting, of course, I had an external provider as well. But in the beginning, I had to do everything except for translation. I had to do more or less everything in that job. Yeah.
It sounds like the real startup life.
It is a startup life.
Whatever is left over, you got to do it.
Exactly, including buying some coffee cups and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. And I also wonder, how was the setup, with UBS in the background, as supporter? Did they own the company or most of the companies in the beginning? Because then later we talk about what changed there. But how do you do the financial and the organizational setup with UBS?
Yeah, in the beginning, UBS had about 2/3 of the company and Zurich Insurance 1/3. And we as a management team were able to get some shares within our bonus program.
Okay. But basically, it was not your company at the beginning. It was a joint venture with UBS and Zurich Insurance. Yeah. But then from day one, you basically strived for a management buyout that you could take over the company. Why was that so important for you and the whole management team to have that option to work towards that goal?
Well, we discussed it with both partners, with Swiss Bank Corporation and with UBS and with Zurich Insurance. And we said, well, if this baby's going to fly, then we do a management buyout within a few years. And that's what we did in 2003. And I think that was a huge step forward. And I was really looking forward to it because I think, that gets you out in freedom.
True. Yeah. That's the ultimate goal as an entrepreneur, I guess.
Exactly.
But I can still imagine, if you do a good job and you really build a profitable company, then UBS and Zurich, they also might have an incentive to not sell their shares because you create a good business and it's profitable. So how were you able to convince them or address these concerns and then really take over?
I actually think it was just a natural step because it's a non-core business. They outsourced it. They let it alive for a while and see how it works. And then if it works, we can fly to the management buyout.
Got it. And then you did that in 2003.
Yeah.
How did that happen then? Because you also probably need some money to finance the buyout, right?
Yeah, exactly. We took up a loan and had to pay it back within a certain period of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
a certain number of shares we had already, but that was a minority share.
And how did that make you feel? Because there you also go into another risk, basically. If you take out a loan and the plan might not work out, you end up with having still to pay back the loan, but no real assets left.
I mean, that's the life of an entrepreneur. If you're not willing to take risks, calculated risks, I think then you shouldn't venture into entrepreneurship. I think that's in hindsight. In the beginning, I didn't think about this, but in hindsight, I think you have to be willing to take certain risks. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
And what helped you to really, calibrate that risk and be confident enough that, okay, that's the right way to go?
I was convinced that our business model will fly.
Why?
Because it was the true trend that it was a non-core service for any company. So I didn't see the reason why, once one or two major companies start this process, then others will follow.
Okay.
But of course, we had to fight for every single agreement with new clients. I mean, it wasn't an easy job, but in the end, we managed to convince companies like Swisscom, Raiffeisen, and Sunrise to outsource, and others were to follow, banks and so on and so forth. So in the end, it was really our core business was business process outsourcing. In the end, and we developed a process on how to integrate those people. Yeah. To give you an example, for instance, when we did one business process outsourcing in Copenhagen, and we always advised the client, if you communicate this to the team, please make sure that at the same day we can come in and present our company and what does it mean to work with CLS Communication. Oh. And then we did that as well in Denmark with our managing director in Denmark. And of course, we showed them, we have now several places outside, and then you can also work in New York or Singapore or wherever, or you can extend your vacation and and work in one of our offices, and it's counted as working hours. Mm-hmm. And then the CEO came back afterwards and said, I hope some people will stay in Denmark, because they were talking about New York and Singapore and everything. But you have to bring in the values you have, the value set you have within a company, what it means to work with us. And they suddenly found, okay, those guys are not that strange.
So you basically, this is actually a huge obstacle, right? That you faced, a huge challenge, integrating the external teams that are getting outsourced and making them part of your culture and your company. And you basically did that with the strong company culture that you already mentioned. And I think at the core of this are your core values that you really defined early on. Can you talk a bit more about how you found your core values and what they were?
Well, actually, we defined our values together with our team at some stage, because the more you grow, at some stage you have to define it, because in the beginning, it's kind of natural and you know each other. And if you start to grow, you have to define them. And certain values that were really crucial to us, like integrity, fairness, and openness, frank, transparent communication, but also the attitude of clients first. I personally hammered that into the company. Honestly, that was one of my, because if you have happy clients and you do your business more or less right, you don't have to worry that much about your figures.
Right, they will come on their own. It'll be good.
Yeah. We still had tough times, during the financial crisis and stuff like that. Of course, then it's tough everywhere. But I mean, if you take care of your clients and you make sure that it's a service-oriented company that's really responsive and takes care of what needs to be done, I think that works.
There's also an interview that you sent me, and there I think one of your former co-workers said that you really walked the talk because you visited so many clients that they really felt client first, that's an important value for our company, and you lead by example. So I think that's a really sort of good underlying story to prove your point.
Yeah, I think that is important. I heard from a CEO some time ago from a large company and said, if your CEO doesn't take care of clients, then you really have to worry about the company. Yeah. And I think that's so true. Absolutely. I fully believe that. And one of our regional heads said, well, Doris, in our organization, everybody knows that clients are important. I said, you sure? He said, yes. And he told me, you know why? Because whenever you are in Asia, you're coming with us to visit clients all day. You're not micromanaging in the office. So even the in-house translator knows that clients are important. So, yeah, you have to walk the talk.
Sure. And then that's probably how you then build a strong and good culture, right? Mm-hmm. Did you do anything besides that? I mean, of course, that's an important part, a crucial part to walk the talk and to lead by example. But did you do anything else to communicate and really re-emphasize the corporate, the cultural values that you had? Did you print them out, or did you, whenever you had a presentation or a memo that you sent out to your employees, did you re-emphasize and re-communicate your values all over again, or how did you do that?
I probably could have done more of that. Okay. but we communicated regularly. And of course, as the company grows and you're in different locations, different countries, different cultural setups, of course you have to communicate it now and then again. But it's also if there's it's kind of corporate culture is kind of a DNA of a company. And whenever I entered a CLS office, no matter where it was, I thought that has a CLS touch. And if that was missing, then something was wrong.
Did that ever happen? Did you ever feel that something was missing when you entered an office abroad?
Well, it was probably just in the beginning when we did some acquisitions, where people came from totally different corporate cultural setups. Then, of course, they had to get accustomed to it. But we were not the type of company that was kind of, acquiring company and making them feel that the team has been acquired. So I told our team it is totally forbidden to talk about the acquisition in our company. We're talking about teaming up, and that gives a different sense of being included, of being inclusive. And we also made sure that when we acquired the Canadian company, we had so-called knowledge exchange sessions where we could see, how do they solve these processes? How do we solve them? And then we took the best of both companies.
Nice. So that really made you stronger in the end, because you took the best of both worlds, basically. Okay. I can also imagine that by doing these acquisitions and having different cultures from all over the world coming together, that at a certain point you also have people or even whole teams that don't really fit to the culture that you want to have. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that?
Yeah, then either you can convince them, or then it's better for both parties to separate.
Yeah. What was the more likely scenario, or the more often scenario?
We hardly ever had to let people go because of cultural issues. I once had an issue with one team where we wanted to, that was a never-ending story, introducing machine translation in a translation market. You really have to convince people. And then I said, well, Doris, we don't want to use that. I took a small team, and then are you aware of the fact that you're going to First of all, you're going to cannibalize our business by introducing machine translation. Second, they told me, are you aware of the fact that some of us will give notice? And then I said, I cannot jeopardize 600 jobs because 5 people don't want to work with a certain tool.
Right.
And then we had about 2 or 3 people that left.
Okay.
And that was okay. I mean, you have to be tough in that as well, because otherwise, it's not going to work.
That's exactly, I think, the trade-off that you often have to do as an entrepreneur. You need to make sure that you make the best decision for the company, because otherwise, if there's no company, there are no jobs that you can give, right? And if there are some people that don't agree with that decision or see it differently, fair point, but then it's just not a good fit, right? Yeah. You still have to make sure that the company's alive and not that you do the best for the employees, but then there's no company left.
You try to leverage it and you try to harmonize it, but it's not always possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, culture and also values, they play an important role also for getting investors on board. In 2009, you basically collaborated or accepted the investment of a private equity firm to then also empower your build and grow strategy. Yeah. Can you talk a bit more about how you selected and made the decision to actually get an investor on board instead of just growing on your own with your operational cash flow?
Okay. Well, what we did when we did the management buyout, I was advised to define the fundamental values right up front with the management team, so that you don't have discussions later on. And then we said, well, do we want to, and one of the questions was, do we want to take a financial investor on board? And then I told my management team, I said, listen, the fundamental question we have to answer is, do we want to have a big piece of a small cake or a smaller piece of a bigger cake? Then everybody said, okay, we take the big cake, but no sharks. We said we need to have a reliable partner, but we don't want to have an investor that has a shark attitude. Yeah. And I think that's important, because you have to be able to get the feeling that you can trust this partner, and that it's not just go. Of course, they have to make money, they have to get the IRR for the exit and stuff like that, but you have to make sure that you can work together, because you're staying together we stayed with them for 5 years, yeah.
But that's not that easy to decide. You haven't worked together. Of course, you have interactions, you have discussions and meetings, but you haven't actively worked together. So how do you find out if you can really trust them?
That's you find out in hindsight. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes you have to trust your gut feeling as well. If you see, well, those are reasonable people with a solid foundation, and they have done other deals with other companies. We did a strategy workshop with them, and so introduced them to the company and showed them our strategy and things like that. And that went really well.
Okay.
But you also have to be aware of the fact that in the beginning it's honeymoon, and then as time goes along, especially towards the exit scenario, when you're close to the exit, then the interests of both parties might not be aligned anymore, because the entrepreneur wants to invest long term, whereas the private equity firm has to get out with a very high IRR.
Sure.
So,
is there anything?
And that is difficult.
Is there anything that you can do to really try to get on the same incentivization path, basically, that you have the same incentives and really work together?
It probably depends on the business.
Okay.
Probably depends on the business. We wanted to invest more into technology and maybe take 1 or 2 markets more into our accounts. And but it's always a trade-off. If you're growing by yourself, then you lack financial means to grow fast. if you're teaming up with a partner, then of course you have to deal with issues of long-term, short-term investments.
And as you said, your board, your management team basically made the decision of getting a smaller piece from a large pie, basically. Yeah. In your case, the pie was probably about $40 billion in market size internationally for translations. That's just crazy if we think about it. So you really decided to go international, to make it big. What helped you? What was like the appeal to make the decision of going international and getting going after the larger pie instead of the smaller pie and staying in Switzerland?
Honestly, I found it thrilling to internationalize a company, and still nowadays, internationalization is still one of my so-called hobbies. And at some stage, when we were buying a fair number of companies, people said, "Well, Doris, are you buying another company again?" I said, "Well, other people buy shoes. I like buying companies." But it's really true. I mean, part of it is kind of paid ongoing education, because I learned so much with the internationalization and with digging into other totally different cultures like Asia. I think I learned a lot, and I was paid for it.
That sounds like the perfect deal.
It's tough. It's tough as well. Of course, it's a lot of work, but
So yeah, let's talk about that growth that you actually pulled off. And you grew organically, obviously, but also through acquisitions. You acquired companies in Canada, as you already mentioned, also in Denmark, in Germany, and also in the UK. How do you make that happen? I mean, this is a huge amount of work, and also, I can imagine, pretty difficult to find the right targets from the outside and making the right bets and decisions which companies to acquire.
Yeah. Well, usually, a lot of it happens. A lot of it happens through personal relationships, because you know certain companies in certain markets because you see each other at conferences and things like that. So the company we acquired in the UK, they had one office in Spain and the other one in France. So basically we could tap into 3 markets, and there the owners was owned by one person, and the owner first we had initial talks, and they said, "Well, look, that's part of the framework. That's how we would consider it." And I was really making sure he could always pull out and without losing face. And when he said, "Well, Doris, I'm not ready yet," I said, "Well, doors are open. I fully understand, fully respect it. Doors are open." And 2 years later, he came back.
But yeah, this really shows the importance of the personal relationships.
Yeah.
I think that's a great anecdote.
Yeah. And the same with the Scandinavian company there. They knew our managing director in Copenhagen very well. And they were attending the same conferences and things like that. And then when those were 4 partners, and when they moved towards retirement, of course, they had to find a solution.
And how did you manage the cash flow during all these acquisitions? I know that you did have the investor from the private equity world, but still, I mean, these are probably quite some significant investments that you had to make there. How do you manage all the cash flow challenge?
I had a great CFO manage that. I was the foreign minister, he was the interim minister.
Then it worked out. Yeah.
Then it worked out, yeah.
Sounds like a good role split then.
We had a good role split. And I think in hindsight, I think, you never can grow a company as an entrepreneur by yourself. You need a great team for that. And I truly treasure our team. They really did a great job. And, it's not that we're talking about translation, it's necessary evil. But in hindsight, you have to be able to manage chaos. Because you never knew Monday morning what's coming in during the day, let alone on Friday evening when it's really when it was really hammering, because everybody wants to get everything done the same day. And then also you had these emergency cases with press releases to be out within 2 hours and stuff like that. So you really have to have an organized chaos. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And for that, you need a great team, flexible, great team.
True. Yeah. What would you say are like the key players that you needed to make everything work? So CFO is one part, but there were also many other people involved. So what were like the key roles that you had to have at your company to make it work?
Well, on the one hand, key is to have excellent translators and copywriters. Honestly, without that, you're not going to survive.
That's your core.
Yeah, exactly. Then project management. Those were the people that were distributing the work. Part of it could be distributed automatically in the end, and part of it had to be assigned. And then you need a technology department because, we industrialized everything, we automated everything to the largest extent. So we need a language technology department and technology department, and then also operations. I mean, we had one person in our COO, he was really thinking and dreaming in processes. And there was not a process that was not organized properly.
Again, probably the right person in the right seat then.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm surprised that you didn't mention sales or marketing.
That of course, I mean, apart from translation, sales marketing is what was less important, but sales. And for us, sales is in our business, it's a mixture between, building trust with the client, selling, and consulting. It's kind of this kind of as with any professional service, it's kind of this thing.
Right.
Yeah. Now, of course, I mean sales is.
It's for every business. That's like the oxygen, right?
Yeah,
the cash flow coming in.
Yeah.
And then another challenge that I would quickly like to highlight is the consolidation, the market that took place back in the days. You are basically an active acquirer of other companies, but I can imagine, if there are like more and more small companies that getting acquired, so you do have a certain consolidation happening in the market, and probably also from the customer side, because it's a necessary evil, but they tend to have to save costs every year, more costs that they need to save. That you also get into a certain cost pressure that you need to fulfill, and people want to talk about the prices and get the same services for lower prices. So how did you manage the consolidation, the cost pressure from the client side?
That was really a tough one, I can tell you. And usually I was sitting at the table with the client, and especially when you were talking to procurement, it really got tough. I mean, I learned the best argumentation I learned when I was working with procurement guys, because they just saw one. That's a dollar sign, and that's it, or the Swiss franc sign. And independent of quality and the requirements and complexity and stuff like that, it was just a price. So we had a price decrease of about, I would say, 50% within 5 years or something like that.
Wow.
And that you can only compensate that with having everything automated and industrialized. In the end, like in the shop floor, we had all those panels with quality statistics, productivity, customer satisfaction, and so on and so forth, with all countries listed, and then we flagged the number one, and of course that gave some peer pressure within the organization.
That's also part of the culture to a certain degree, right? Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. You were also living through the dot-com bubble with your company. I can imagine, seeing the markets crash and everybody panicking and getting into crisis mode. That also had an effect on your business. What was it?
Oh, definitely. It was because before the dot-com bubble, we had huge projects, with e-services for banks, stuff like that. Once I had a client that asked us whether we could translate 10,000 pages within 1 month. And okay. How many pages have been translated? Oh, they're working on it. Maybe not yet. And then we decided, and then we ramped up all our processes. We set up a new process for large projects, and in the end, and then we split the whole workflow. We split that, and learned a hell of a lot. In the beginning, my team told me, "Well, Doris, but you're not serious that we take on this assignment." I said, "Well, if we don't do it, who does it?" And then we discussed with the client how we could tackle this whole thing, how we could do the processes, and how we could refine it. And then, I had a great external IT company. I called him up and said, well, you're getting computers that have to be bought, just buy them. And they developed a terminology tool over the weekend and things like that.
That's crazy.
That was an absolutely crazy time, I can tell you.
Wow.
And then we did the 5 pages within 1 month.
That's impressive.
5,000 pages. Yeah. And then, and the person told me, Doris, you're not serious that we can do this. About months later, another bank came along and said, well, could you do 1,000 pages within 1 month? And then the terminology person said, well, no problem, we've done 5,000. Yeah. But if I had come up with 1,000 first,
And then it was like, been there, done that, no problem at
Exactly,
all.
got the T-shirt.
But then, the dot-com bubble, I'm sure that this also had an effect, probably a negative one on your business. Yeah. So how did you live through that time?
That was the time when I first thought, well, we might run into a loss, but we did not.
Okay.
We're lucky. I mean, what we then learned afterwards, but that was after 2005. What we then did, we flipped our business model, and in the beginning we did two-thirds of the volume with in-house translators, and we outsourced 1/3. And we changed that to, in the end, we did about 20 or 30% in-house for the real critical and demanding stuff, and the rest we outsourced. That's
to freelancers? Or?
To freelance. That's how we built up a base of 5,000 freelancers worldwide.
That's like another core component of your successful setup, I guess.
You always had to. You always had with that. And then, of course, 2009, 2010, we had the financial crisis. And that was the toughest one, honestly. That was the toughest one. There we had to downsize. And I think that for me as an entrepreneur, that's the toughest part in your business life, when you have to let go good people. Yeah. That is.
Yeah, you hired them in the first place, and you think that you made a really good decision, and then it just hurts if you have to let them go. Is there any, tip how to deal with that stress and these feelings that, it's a horrible situation, but what can you do to get out there as an entrepreneur and survive that?
Yeah, so you still have to save the company, and you have to make sure that the rest of the team stays on board. I think that takes a lot of discussion and showing your feelings as well, because that was not easy. Yeah. That was the toughest one.
What did you say to the people remaining at the company? Because if some people have to leave, no matter if it's it's not personal, it's because of the budget that is not coming in, less orders and so on. How do you make sure that the morale and the motivation is not suffering too much from the people still staying there?
It is suffering in the beginning, but it eases off over time.
Okay. What did you do to help to develop the motivation and get it back on top?
We tried that as a whole management team. We just tried to be open for discussions and questions they had, and we were very transparent. And also our HR department was really great. They handled it extremely well. It was very professional. So, with a great team, you can go very, very far. That is, and I could never have built the company all by myself. That would have been an illusion.
But it's basically open and transparent communication, and also being available for questions and personal talks, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Let's also quickly look at, you grow super fast with CLS communication, but you also have competition from all over the world, basically.
Oh, yeah.
How do you handle them?
Well, you fight them.
In what way? What did you do? What were the fights that you had to?
Well, we tried to fight them in the sense that we could convince our clients that it made sense to have, well, in the end, large organizations, they usually split up and they had 2 or 3 providers. In the beginning, they had 1, and then the development was to have 2 or 3. And we just tried to make the best job. Always go the extra mile and never give up.
This sounds so simple, when you say it, but I'm sure in practice, this is really a lot of hard work, and it's tough. You have tough moments.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough. So I cannot avoid that, but it's in the end, if you see the result that it's going in the right direction, then of course, then you think it's worthwhile.
How do you also balance that, with your personal energy level and your personal life by, going all in full speed and really rock and rolling in the business world, while still, staying healthy and keeping a good and sharp mind, and not getting completely burned out by just doing that?
I think you're probably not getting burned out because of work. I think you might get burned out because you're in the wrong company, or you're with the wrong team, or you're mobbed, or things like that. Yeah. But from work, I think, and I also hate this work-life balance, as if you're not living while you're working.
Right. It's more of a life balance.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a life balance. And of course, I always took my vacation. And when my former husband and myself, we used to go sailing a lot. And then we went to 7 times in about 10 years to Australia for 3 weeks on a sailing boat. After 3 weeks on a sailing boat, you're coming back, and nobody managed to get me upset anymore for about 2 months. they never managed to drive me crazy again for about at least 2 months. Why are those big people running around all the time? you totally run. You really come totally relaxed. Come back totally relaxed.
So the vacation was your secret in that regard to stay sane and healthy, basically.
And do some sports.
That always helps, for sure. Let's also talk about your supporters. Early on, we already heard UBS was a big supporter, and especially their management with Peter Wuffli. Yeah. Can you talk a bit more about how you actually, convinced him and also got the support from the bank to pull this off?
Well, actually, he wanted to outsource the part. It was actually his idea, and I wanted to build one up. So we were actually a great team together. And he had to convince the bank that, and I had to do it on my level. He had to convince the bank that it was a good thing to outsource it, and that took a while. So that's why he said, "Well, it might take some time to convince." Because and I fully understand the bank because they have so highly mission critical, confidential information. If something leaks out, they have a huge reputation risk for that, sure. And that's in the end why we even decided to have a lease line into UBS at that time. So, and no customer sensitive documents could be transferred and things like that. And all our clients they told us, well, this type of document can only be translated in-house and within Switzerland. So we were not even able to transfer it to the US or to Singapore or to somewhere else or to our in-house team. But we had very strict confidential rules and regulations from the banks, but also from the telecom companies. We had one telecom company said, well, the translators working for their competitor is not allowed to work for them. So we had to separate the systems.
Makes sense. So you took the necessary measures to adapt to that. Yeah.
And of course, it takes a lot of discussions. An outsourcing process is not easy. It takes a lot of discussions, but it's better if you solve it up front than in hindsight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an important learning that many entrepreneurs try to, we solve that later.
We'll fix it later on,
yeah. It will just probably come back 2 or 3 times as big of a problem as it is on the first time.
And, our company was really accustomed to work in the confidentiality field. I mean, we even had translators going on the client's premises and working in-house. So we set up LANs and stuff like that, WLANs and stuff like that in-house. And then the computers went into the safe, and then they came the next morning. Or in Canada, we were working for the Canadian Government of Defense. There we had a separate room with separate entrance code, and the official came and took even the computers with them again.
Yeah, that's different times. Yeah. And another big supporter we already heard was the private equity firm, Zurmond Madison, that invested in you. Of course, they gave you money, and they also, as we heard, did the strategy workshop with you. But how was the collaboration? How did they support you along the 5 years that you worked together?
Okay, yeah, they had 3 seats on our board of directors, so they were in regular contact with us. And of course, they were also at the strategy meetings and supervised the figures very crucially.
Sure, yeah. It's their job. They have to, right?
It's their job. It's their bread and butter.
Yeah, but beyond that, I mean, of course, now they have board seat, but how did they specifically support you on, did they also support you on the M&A part? Did they have their own team supporting you on that? Or in what other aspects beside the board seat and the investment did they support you to build a successful company?
Well, actually, they helped us, of course. When we had a deal in there, they helped. The first ones we did all by ourselves. And even the one in Denmark, I did by myself, despite the fact that they came on board 2 months earlier. I did it together with our CFO and the management team on site in Denmark, and with Canada, there we had an external one as well that was helping there. But then one of the board members from Zurmond, they joined us and came to see the Canadian market, and especially the team up there. And once I took him to Asia, and I was surprised he was already a senior, and I was surprised, but he accompanied me to every single client meeting. So I went from one place to the other and went to see clients.
Nice. Again, this client first mentality.
That has to be
crucial, right? Then in 2013, you switched from CEO to becoming a board member yourself. at the company. Why did you decide to take that step and switch your role, basically?
Well, actually, I had a combined role before Group CEO and delegate of the board. And then I handed over my CEO role and focused on and became vice chairman. And I think 16 years as CEO is probably enough. From a startup to a grown-up company. So I think at some stage you have to say, well, that's probably enough.
Was there also, any personal reason where you said, okay, I've seen it now. My job is a bit more repetitive and maybe also gets a bit more boring, or were there also any other reasons behind that?
Well, I think the thing is, I knew that we are moving towards the exit phase with Thurman Madison. We knew we had we said 4 to 6 years, and in 2014, then we kicked off we started the sales process, and I think that was the right moment for me to say, well, that's it, and of course, you're right. It's to some extent it became routine after a while.
Especially after that time, I can imagine that you've probably seen all the situations that you could have seen, right?
Exactly. I probably would have needed another kick.
Let's also quickly look at the numbers. When you kicked off the sales process, you had 600 employees, a network of more than 5,000 freelancers, as you already mentioned, offices in 20 locations across 10 countries. And you basically were part of the top 10 translation firms worldwide with a revenue of $80 to $90 million in a year. I think these are impressive numbers. How you built that company, from being part of a bank to then building such an international big company, I think that's super impressive. And now let's talk about your sale. You had the private equity firm on board, and at a certain point in time, they also, of course, need to generate a return and go for an exit. So you basically faced the decision, do we get another investor on board because they want to have their return, or do we sell the whole company to a strategic partner where we actually see fit? How did these discussions go?
Well, actually, in the end, we decided to go with the strategic partner because we had a look on the market who could be interested, and there were some private equity firms. But there were also some strategic partners, and the one we chose in the end which is Linebridge. The strategic fit was actually perfect because we were active in different verticals and in different markets. So where they were weak, we were strong, and vice versa. And so that made a lot of sense to sell it to them. Of course, if you have an American company integrating a European one, integration problems, integration issues, you have to face. That is fact of life.
I can imagine, because
those two cultures really don't fit together.
So Linebridge then took over and bought CSL Communication in 2015. You said you already kicked off the process of selling the company in 2014. Yeah. How did that look like? I mean, you obviously talked to several companies, but then what really made that decision? You said the strategic fit, but what led to that decision? Was it also the return? Because that was the interest of the private equity firm. But you as an entrepreneur, you also had the long-term view. So how did you fit that together and found the common ground with your investor?
Well, actually, our team once told me, "Well, Doris, how can you sell your baby?" I said, this baby is grown up, and we have to let it go for marriage. That's the point now. And with Thurman Madison, we just looked at both options and found out that Linebridge is the better fit. And the CFO and myself, we went to Boston and talked to the company and got the management presentations and stuff like that. And I think really honestly, talking to the CEO, it really looked like and still nowadays I would say strategically it made a lot of sense.
The strategic fit, this is something that you can plan for, or it can also sort of just happen organically. So did you plan for that exit and to be a strategic partner for Linebridge and a good complementary skill that you offer there? Was that on purpose, or was it more by accident?
It was by accident.
Okay.
It was by accident.
So there was no master plan behind that?
No.
Okay.
We had one other company in mind, but there we had too many common points. And that would have led to duplications.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's just less attractive for them because they already have these market shares.
And it was less attractive for us as well because we didn't want to let people go.
Sure.
And, if you've got dual operations, so one of them has to go.
True. And then how do you actually come up with the right price for the company?
Well, that's with every negotiation. That's a point of negotiation. There are certain multiples that are in the market for certain areas, be it tech companies or professional services companies. You have certain multiples on the market, and then they take the multiples times EBITDA, and that or EBIT. That's it.
Right. And of course, our listeners are very curious to learn or understand for how much you sold the company. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, because it was published, it was $77 million US dollars.
Great. And for you on a personal level, I'm sure that this also had a very positive impact. What did that mean for you on a personal level?
No comment on figures, personal figures.
Got it. But I'm sure that you were probably happy about the deal, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was a good deal. It was a fair deal. I think it was a fair deal. Great. It can always be better, but I think it was a fair deal. Yeah.
Sure.
Especially in view of the fact that about 2 weeks later, I think it was about 2 weeks later, Swiss National Bank announced that they do away with the exchange rate, the minimum exchange rate between Swiss francs and the euro. Yeah. So it would have cost Lionbridge a lot more.
So it was just the perfect timing to.
And then we would definitely have had renegotiations.
Sure. Yeah. We'll just probably have extended the process. Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, these are the little things that you cannot plan for. They just happen, and then looking back, you just realize, oh, the timing was actually right, but you couldn't really influence it too much, right? Yeah. So now you sold your baby, the grown-up adult, basically. What happened next for you? I know that now today you're working in your own company, Value Globe, to focus your board mandates and also investments in startups. And I just wonder, what did you do afterwards? What was okay, it's done, the company's sold, what do I do next?
Yeah. Well, I founded Value Globe in view to do things we just mentioned, including helping companies to internationalize, and then focusing on board mandates. And I think, and then we founded Eurasia Competence, a company where we support European companies expanding to Asia and Asian companies expanding to Europe. And then, of course, I started to build up kind of my own portfolio, realizing in the end that I'm not that good of a portfolio manager, because everybody that was crying out loud was served first.
Oh, okay.
So now I have a package which is manageable, and I think the best assignment I have but that's kind of a sort of a hard story is Esther's Children's Villages, Switzerland, and then I'm also I joined them in 2014 and was able to take over chairmanship in last year in June, and I'm also a member of the International Senate and being drawn into one project after the other and the leadership selection committee, and I think that is a really rewarding work. It's really rewarding work where you can put in entrepreneurial aspects into it as well. You have to communicate a bit differently, but you can put an entrepreneurial spirit into an NGO. And I think that is something that's really intriguing.
Nice. What makes it so, rewarding and also motivating for you?
Because I think, it's an organization with a very, very strong purpose. And and they have great programs, be it the children's villages, but also the family strengthening programs, where you basically create an ecosystem in a community, because you include the community, the authorities within the community. You have the loan and saving groups, where it's really, and after 5 to 7 years we can exit again, and they're self-sustaining.
Great.
And that is, I think, it's an organization with such a strong purpose, honestly. And of course, I'm doing this pro bono. I'm not earning anything on this, but you have to that is something where you can give something back to society.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also think this is very impressive that, after 5 years you can exit and the projects are independent and self-sustaining. I think that's exactly the part where you should go with the entrepreneurial mindset, right? No matter if you're leading a company or if it's an association, a thing with a good cause behind it, this should be the goal. Otherwise, there's hardly a reason for it. And if you can really support that with your entrepreneurial mindset and bring that in, I think that's a huge gain for everyone.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I mean, of course, I made mistakes as well. When I first joined them, we had a strategy meeting and I said, well, what do we have to do to double our revenues within the next 5 years?
People are looking, are you crazy?
Are you crazy? I thought, okay, Albisser, that's wrong. That is exactly wrong, not approximately right. And then a couple of years later came along, what do we have to do in order to take care of double the number of children? Then nobody could say anything.
Right. So it's a question of framing it the right way.
It's a question of framing it the right way, exactly.
But these are like great learning experiences again, right?
That was a steep learning experience during in that organization. And then I moved in 2013 when I handed over my CEO job. A colleague asked me, well, Doris, you handed over your CEO job. Wouldn't you be willing to help us because we would need an entrepreneur with internationalization experience? And that was an e-health startup, spin-off from ETH. And in the beginning, I didn't even know what a genome was. And then, but the learning curve was really, really steep. And then I accompanied Professor Ernst Hafen on his visits to potential clients or potential financial investors. Mm-hmm. And there I really learned a lot within the whole team. And it's basically they developed a platform where you can have your health data, and you as a person, as a user, you say with whom you want to share what. Maybe fitness data, you want to share them with your friends. Health data, you want to share them with your doctor, and you might also be willing to give some data in anonymized form to research, and that will, in the end, will build up a huge community. And we now, only through funds from national funds, we were able to develop use cases. We have a number of use cases for different diseases. So it's growing. Awesome. It's growing, but it's still financing this startup is still a hassle. But the team is really, they have moved forward.
Yeah. And I can see you are not getting bored even without the baby that you built. And for me, it's also very impressive to see you really seem to expose yourself over and over again to these new steep learning curves, whether it's in business or in education purposes. Mm-hmm. You always go down these new learning curves and want to learn something new. I think that's a great red line that we recognize across your story. So before we end this episode, I have one last question for you. Are there any resources like books or blogs, podcasts, or tools and gadgets that you can recommend to our listeners that you use yourself?
Well, I would probably, for strategy, I would probably look into the Blue Ocean strategy.
Why is that a good tip?
I think that's an absolutely great tip because I think that's absolutely great book and framework, because you shouldn't be swimming in the red ocean, meaning fighting against competitors all the time, but you should find niches and new ways on how to, and especially nowadays, to flip your business model around, or to offer new services which are not yet existing on the market, so that you can grow your business without always swimming in this red ocean, which is kind of boring.
Makes sense. So Doris, thank you so much for your time and for the great stories today. And we're already excited to welcome you back for the second episode.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. Stay connected with the Swisspreneur community through our LinkedIn and Instagram profiles. Make sure to subscribe to our show on whatever podcast platform you're using. See you next week for a brand new episode of the Swisspreneur Show.